we've been going over the book of Ecclesiastes, and we've been talking about how, as human beings, we are always chasing after something. Okay, every one of us, whether you believe in God, whether you have a relationship with God, it doesn't matter. Whether you're religious, non-religious, you're old or young, we're all chasing after something. Book of Ecclesiastes was written by Solomon, and he says at the end of his life, I have chased after many things. So we went over some of them, right? What was some of them that we went after? What did Solomon chase after? Wisdom. And at the end of it, he said it was, even wisdom and knowledge, he said it was meaningless. What else did he chase after? Wealth. What else? Power. Okay, happiness or pleasure. And even meaning itself, he chased after all these things. At the end of his life, he says, was it all worth it? Was it all worth it? No, it felt like I was just chasing after the wind. What does that mean? That means when you get to the end of it, what happens if you chase the wind? You end up with absolutely nothing. So he basically says, I got to the end of my life, I chased after all these things, there's no substance left. Why? Because at the end of it, there's only death. So we went over how we could chase after all of these different things, but we're not going to get anywhere. But what's really underneath, we're going to wrap up the series today. What's underneath all of these things, the reason why he keeps saying, pleasure is meaningless, even good things are meaningless, careers, everything, even it could be good things, are meaningless because in the end, we're going to die. On the first section, I'm going to go back a little bit. On the first section, he says, animals, human beings, are we that different? And he says, of course there's differences, but in the end, we're going to both die anyways. So it doesn't matter. Okay, you can chase after pleasure, career, status, power, but hey, we all came from dust and we're going to return to dust. So does it really matter? Do these things matter? He feels like in the face of death, none of these things really matter. One more. Again, he says the same thing. Before this, he's talking about there's people who are moral, who are trying to better this life, who are doing good things. And there's people who are evil, who are taking people down and not really making their lives any better for people. And yet, he says, but who cares? Why? Because in the end, it doesn't matter. Same destiny takes them all. Whether it's a good thing like love or a bad thing like hatred and jealousy, doesn't matter. No one's going to remember things anyways. So he's saying at the face of death, and that's really the undercurrent or the idea undergirding the whole idea or the whole book of Ecclesiastes. Nothing is meaningless in the end if there's death. Okay? Have you guys ever felt like that before? You thought, man, this is really important, this is really important, this is really important. But you get in face of death, then you realize, do these things really, really matter at the end? And that's what Solomon is really talking about here. He feels like he got to the end of his life, and he's like, all the different things I did, does it really matter if all I'm seeing is death in front of me? This last weekend and week too, I went to New York. And I went to a museum in New York, the 9/11 Memorial Museum. Okay? Some of you guys maybe were not born then, but there was a terrorist attack in New York. And so a lot of people died. And so instead, after the whole crash and everything else, they built a memorial to tell us what happened that day. So a lot of a lot of different things going on. But right when you go in, I mean, they designed it very well, but it's just like everybody's silent. Right? Everybody's talking in whispers. Okay? Everybody's serious. Why? Because throughout the whole museum, what do you encounter with? You are encountered with death and destruction and violence. And so in the face of it, I thought about, on the outside, everybody's like laughing or everybody's enjoying themselves. It's really interesting. Right across the museum, there's like a shopping center. It's a really nice looking shopping center too. And you go in there, everybody's enjoying time. They're having fun. They're talking and shopping and everything else. And the stark contrast, because we went through the mall and then we came out and we went across the street. We went into the museum. Silence. Everybody's quiet. No one's thinking, oh, what kind of shirt should I get? Or no one's thinking in there, how much money do I have in my bank account? Or what's my job status looking like? So again, you go in there, when you're in front of death, it seems like none of those things really matter. If you go in there, there's a place where they call out every person who died during 911. They play a video of like pictures of them, and they have family members describe what kind of life they've led. And again, it's like some of the parents talk about some of the good memories, and some of them, they list off the credentials, the resume, the things they did, the things they accomplished. And again, I was sitting there, I was looking at their life and their picture, and again, at the face of death, I had the same experience as Solomon. I go, man, does it really matter? Do all of these things really matter? So, we're going to be talking about death today. Okay? There's a book called The Gift of Pain. This is what Paul Brand said. By the way, Paul Brand, he's a doctor, and he primarily worked in India, and he worked with people with leprosy, so skin problem. And this is what he said. In the United States, I encountered a society that seeks to avoid pain at all costs. Patients lived at a greater comfort level than any I had previously treated. The people in America. That's us. But they seem far less equipped to handle suffering and far more traumatized by it. What is he saying? He's saying, I'm comparing when I was a doctor in India, and I'm comparing the patients from India and in America. And people in America just cannot handle pain. Just have a difficult time. But why? They're so much richer. Their technology is so much better. Technical advances, medical advances, and yet people cannot deal with pain and suffering. And I think he's not talking about death necessarily, but I think we could actually say the same thing about us as well. A lot of generations before us, a lot of different cultures deal with death, I think, much better than I think the Westerners. Okay, and what I mean by Westerners is basically Americans here, but also like Europeans and stuff like that. But by far, we have a difficult time dealing with death. Okay, why is this? Why is it that when it comes to suffering and pain and death, we have such a difficult time? Why is it that our society doesn't prepare us for suffering, for negative things? It's because we live in a postmodern society, okay, which basically says no God, okay? There is no God, or we cannot know God. Okay, we cannot even if he does exist, who knows what kind of God he is? And if you say anything otherwise, you're a bigot. Okay, that kind of attitude. So this is very important because people in the past, like ancient times, like the ancient religion, like Egyptians or the Greeks, for example, they said after you die, what happens? You go to Hades, a place of the underworld, right? Like the Egyptian gods or the Greek gods, okay? You go to Hades, and so you live with all the other dead people. So that tells you that, hey, death is not pleasant, but at least after death, there is something else. Okay? How about pantheistic religions like Buddhism or Hinduism? What do they say? After you die, what happens? You reincarnate. And then, of course, depending on your karma, okay, you're going to go up or down. But at least what happens? There's something that comes after death. How about in Judeo-Christian religion? Okay, Judaism, Islam, the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, what do we say? Okay, what do we say? After you die, you either go to heaven or hell. So there's something that will come up after. There's always something. And whether you like that or not, there's an afterlife. But for us, living in the Western society, no God, no afterlife, no supernatural, what happens after we die? Okay, this is what one a biologist said. He's a professor of biology at Cornell. Let me summarize my view on what modern evolutionary biology tell us loud and clear. So he does not believe in God. He believes in evolution, which is by chance, okay, no design, no supernatural, Okay? We're just here. Accident. And this is what he says. There are no gods, obviously. So because of that, there's no purpose, no goal-oriented forces of any kind. Everything, there's no like, like the ghost of your grandfather or God or the Spirit is directing you. None of these. Okay? Everything happens for a reason because of your choice. Okay? There is no life after death. Why? Because we came by accident. So once we die, that's it. There's no afterlife. When I die, I am absolutely certain that I'm going to be dead. And that's the end for me. So do you see why Westerners, we have such a difficult time? Okay, and I'm talking about secular Westerners. Okay, I know some of you guys are most of you guys are Christians in here. But you have to understand, we live in a society that tells us, all you got is this life. YOLO. Okay, you only live here once. You got to live it out. Why? Because literally, there's nothing afterwards. So when suffering comes, when death comes, it devastates us because there is nothing afterwards. Death is the end of it. There's a guy, he wrote a whole book about death. Great read. I actually haven't read it yet, but I feel like at least the premise, it's really, really good. The whole idea, okay, actually, let me read it and then I'll explain. He says this: the idea of death, or the fear of it, haunts the human animal like nothing else. It is the mainspring of human activity, designed largely to avoid the fatality of death, to overcome it by denying it some way that is the final destiny of man. Okay, he's simply saying this. Everything that we do as human beings, we do it because we're trying to avoid this concept of death. We don't want to know. Again, he's Ernest Becker. He's not a Christian. He's not a believer. He's a secular, again, postmodern. Okay? And he's like, do you guys know? Do you understand? Everything that humans we do, we can't bear the fact that we're going to die. So he actually says this. You think you are chasing after money or pleasure or career, status, power, whatever you're chasing. You think you're chasing these things because you really want them. He is actually saying, not only are you chasing those things because those things are attractive in itself, but you're also chasing after those things because you want to run away from death. You feel like if you have money, then you can avoid death. You think if you have status, you could avoid death. If you feel like you have control and authority and pleasure, you can forget about death. And so he's saying, and that's why the book is called Denial of Death. All mainspring of human activity, it is to avoid death. Why? Because again, when we die, according to the secular world, there's nothing. There's nothing. So how are you going to deal with life? Just by chasing after things. Okay? And then when it comes, then you just go without thinking about it. And that's how you go. Okay. So one person describes, okay, this whole world, the worldview that we hold on to, the secular worldview, as world without windows. Okay, I want you to imagine that. Can you imagine living in a house and there's no windows? There's no windows, there's no doors. You're just stuck there. Or, let me make it even more frightening. Imagine you're in a car, no windows. Okay, the anxiety of that, right? Even, have you guys ever driven through like when it's like raining like crazy and you can't like see in front of you? But imagine like black, nothing. You don't see anything. And that's how he describes the Western worldview that we have. There is no afterlife, guys. This is it. YOLO. Anxiety, but just enjoy the heck out of it, and then, hey, you'll crash and die anyways. Who cares? Okay? So again, the society that we live in, the culture that we live in, doesn't prepare anybody, any one of us, for death. If anything, it just says, enjoy the heck out of it, and that's it. But doesn't prepare us whatsoever. So again, we can resonate. I think a lot of us, that's why I think I resonate a lot with the book of Ecclesiastes. Because he was really, he wrote this like 1,000 years ago, and yet, thousands of years ago, and yet, he understood it somehow. He understood life. This is what life looks like without God. He can resonate with a lot of us in here. Because we live in a society where it says, there's no God, guys. Do whatever you want. Live however you want. And enjoy the heck out of it. And yet we live in a world without windows. Okay. So that's pretty bleak. Okay. Are you guys depressed yet? Okay, good. So now let's go into Christianity. Okay. Because Christianity actually gives us an answer to the problem of death. Our culture, our society cannot provide an answer for us. But Christianity actually gives us a meaningful, adult, mature answer to this idea of death. Okay, so let's get to it right away. 1 Thessalonians 4. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death. So you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again. And so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. So it tells us pretty clearly. It says, if there's no God, there's no hope. But for you, Christians, if you are a Christian in here, for you, Christian, you could grieve. There is sadness. But don't grieve in the same way that people without hope, okay, people who just say there's no God, there's no afterlife, don't grieve like them. For them, they live in a world without windows. They should be in deep anxiety. For you, you are sad. Absolutely, you are sad. Because someone has died. Or you see death in front of you. And yet it says, we do not grieve in the same way. Why? Because there is hope. There's actually a light at the end of the tunnel. So it might look very bleak. It might look very dark. And yet, there's actually light coming through. Why? It says it here, for we believe that Jesus died, rose again, so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep with him. This is really the central message of Christianity. Do you guys know that when Jesus came, there's a lot of things he could have done? Okay, for example, do you know that if you think about it, Jesus could have cured homelessness? If he wanted to, right? For example, right? Because what did he do? He had like 2 pieces of bread or something like that, or 5 pieces of bread. What did he do? He fed 5,000 people. So that means he has the ability to continue to produce food at his disposal. How about sickness? Did he have any problems with sickness? Did he have any problems healing people? He go, oh, sorry, that kind of cancer. No, I can't handle that. No, what happens? He heals everybody. Okay, I mean, there's different cases, but there's no like disease that he couldn't heal. So that means Jesus could have done a lot of things. He could have freed disease. He could have freed homelessness and violence. He had a lot of power. And yet, what does he do? He doesn't continue to do these things. Other people, they expected him. They said, hey, produce more food. Hey, just fix everybody's problem and it'll be fine. But he doesn't do that. What does Jesus do at the end of his life? He dies on the cross. Why does he do that? Because Jesus' mission is not just to make your lives a little bit better for you guys. Okay? But his whole point was he realized that as humanity, our ultimate thing is death. That's our ultimate problem. For example, do you guys remember Nazareth? He died. He was one of Jesus' friends. And then Jesus brought him back to life. But what happened? Well, we don't know what happened, but what can we postulate that happened? He died again. He died again. And that's the destiny for each and every one of us. He could feed all of us, but we're going to die. He can cure all of our disease or disabilities or whatever we have, addictions we have. He can fix all of that. And yet, what's going to happen at the end? We're still going to die. So we still have a problem with death because of our sin, it tells us. Because we refuse to be with life itself. We continue to say to God, God, I don't want to be with you. I want to have control over my life. I want to do whatever I want to do. I want autonomy. And because of that, there's no life in us. So, this is why Christianity is really beautiful, because it tells us that Jesus didn't come just to make, I talked about this last week as well. Jesus didn't come just to make our lives a little bit better. Like your life is pretty cool, and then, hey, you put Jesus on top of it. He's like the cherry on top. And woo! Your life, your career, money, your relationships, woo! Everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be dandy. No, instead, if you realize that Jesus came for dead people, all people who are going to die, people who are all on death row. And when the spear of death is coming towards him, towards each and every one of us, he actually gets in front of the spear, he dies, and gives us life. And that's what it's talking about here. For we believe that Jesus died. He took our death. And he rose again. And so that we believe that God will bring with him, Jesus, those who have fallen asleep with him. That's what Christianity is all about. That's the core message of Christianity. We, as a society, as human beings, we have a problem. The biggest problem of all, which is death. And Jesus, he says, I have the ultimate solution. I will die for you instead, so you can live. In 2 Timothy, it says, it has been revealed through the appearing of Savior Christ Jesus, who has destroyed death and brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. So again, do you see the power of Christianity? Do you see that, again, God doesn't want to just give you a better life, although that could happen. God wants to give you life itself. Because all of us, whether we like it or not, one day we're going to die. Whatever we're chasing, we're going to die. We're going to come in face of death. And God's saying, if you believe in me, yes, you might die, but not eternal death. That with me, that you will be resurrected. That there is hope afterwards. That you are not living in a world where it's just pure darkness. And a world without window, but there's actually a light. Let me end by using this. So George Herbert, he's a pastor a long time ago, he said this: death used to be an executioner. Death used to be an executioner. But the gospel, which is what I talked about, the gospel of Jesus, has made him just the gardener. Okay? Now bringing it back to the children's story with the seed. Okay? What happens with the executioner? What happens if you see an executioner? That's it. Your life is done. But what happens if death is a gardener? Then what happens? What happens when you garden? Okay? You dig a hole and you're a seed. What happens? You go in there. What happens? It's dark. It's clammy. It's horrible. But is that the end? No. That's just the beginning. Because you're going to start seeing the light and you're going to realize, wow, I become something beautiful. And that's why, again, for people without God, okay, people who are not Christians, you should stay as far away from death as possible. And death, again, is the furthest thing that should be on your mind. You should be YOLOing out there. But as a Christian, then death can become actually even a beautiful thing. Again, none of us want to die, of course, because it actually says God has placed eternity within us. We shouldn't want to die. And yet, we know that death actually will take us to even better life. Why? Because we have eternity with God. We have a place where there is no suffering, no death. And our biggest desires, the deepest desires of our hearts, a place where we will actually be full and filled. That's the place. We'll end with this verse. This is John the Baptist's dad describing Jesus. Because of the tender mercy of God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. So again, it's describing us, all of us, not as people who are rejoicing and having a great time, but no, we're all in this world without window. It's dark. And there's only death waiting for us. And it tells us, no, Jesus came to show us light, that there is hope in him. And through that, we can experience even the worst thing, which is death. It could be the greatest thing. C.S. Lewis puts it like this. He says, at the end of the book, the Narnia series, one of the last book, I forgot the name of the book, but he said this. I'm going to ruin it, but basically everybody dies at the end. But it says it really beautifully. C.S. Lewis says at the end, he says, but that was just the preface. Now, because they died and they now have eternity left, it's just on to the next chapter. And the next chapter is 10,000 times better than the chapter before. And that's the life that God wants to give to each and every one of us. Do you believe that? That only comes by believing Jesus, that he died for you.